to ask the question, why do faculty follow the rubric? Is it for the gaining of the award? Is it to edit on the faculty report at the end of the year? Is it perhaps for compliance? Certainly, accessibility and other considerations are included in the rubric. Is it perhaps to drive excellence in the department? I would say that most faculty follow the rubric because it's good for students. And in today's presentation, I'm going to bring out how the rubric really lines up with the hero's journey, which is a principle in writing, in filmmaking, to engage audiences. But why really engage students? What is engagement? Well, engagement can be split into three areas. That of behavioral engagement, which means students attend a class, they participate in class. Emotional engagement, which would relate to reactions of students in the classroom or outside of the classroom to the teacher, students, or the organization. Positive and emotional engagement is also linked to creating ties to the institution and to building the willingness of students to work. And then the third one, cognitive engagement, means the level of investment in learning that students demonstrate. It includes thoughtfulness and purposefulness in assigned tasks. It means exerting the necessary effort to comprehend complex ideas or master difficult skills. Two researchers that I subscribe to, Skinner and Belmont, in a 1993 paper, offered this view on engagement that in addition to the three aspects I just discussed, student engagement also focuses on engagement versus disaffection. So they suggest that engagement means intensity and emotional quality of student involvement in initiating and carrying out learning activities. And when engaged, students select tasks on the border of their competencies, and such work is accompanied by positive emotional tone. When given the opportunity, engaged students exert intense effort and concentration along with enthusiasm, optimism, curiosity, and interest towards their chosen task. On the other hand, students who are disengaged, the disaffection means that they are passive, they do not try hard, and they give up easily in face of challenges. Such students tend to be bored, depressed, anxious, or even angry about their presence in the classroom. Sometimes they seem withdrawn from learning or rebellious toward teachers and classmates. So I think we all agree that engagement is a key focus and concern for us. As you see in this picture, I think it's true that there is more in students' minds than just the knowledge, the fact, the discussions that we conduct either online or in the classroom. In fact, there's more to us as human beings than the communication that might be happening within a 16-week course. So let's consider some of the publications, some of the books that I would like to recommend, and some of the books that really inspired me to transition from my initial focus on motivation, human motivation, to my dissertation in gamification, and to storification now, really with the inclusion of the hero's journey. So the first book I want to recommend is James Campbell, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is a 1949 publication based on Joseph Campbell's study of myths across the world. And what he came up with was this theory of a monomyth, meaning that across different nations, across cultures, the stories that we tell have very similar structures. Of course, we all know that there's an introduction to a story, there's some main content and a conclusion. But it goes really beyond that, and this book really laid foundation for much of what today we would consider writing of novels, creating movies, and really putting a context in a story for various things. The second book, The Writer's Journey, this is actually perhaps another evolution of The Hero with 1,000 Faces. In this instance, the writer Christopher Vogler, who at the time was working for Disney in 1985, inspired again by Joseph Campbell, came up with a memo showing how much of the Disney stories are based on the same structure. And that 7-page memo later became a book, The Writer's Journey, which now is studied by many upcoming writers and writers in polishing their skills in storytelling. And a third book I want to recommend is called Suggestible You by Eric Vance. And this book talks about this effect of placebo, both in medical field and in others, which really brings a lot of tangible support for storytelling. In other words, the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell others, can have physical effects and can have changes that go well beyond just entertainment. Now, this next slide shows a little review of the ECP rubric, Exemplary Course Rubric. If you are familiar with the program, that's great. If you are not, I'll go over some of the sections, and then later we'll link the sections to storytelling. But as you can see, the rubric is divided into 4 main categories. These categories are split into percentages of influence. And the way the program works is once a course is completed, the design of it is completed, it is offered to students. Then the activity information and the design is submitted to multiple reviewers to be taken through this rubric, very much like a checklist. So what I will try to do today in this presentation is to show that a checklist is great. However, as if this checklist was a deck of cards and we have some cards in our hand, when do we play each element? What should be the sequential order of applying these principles as to create a good story, a story that will engage students and create this kind of a feeling of catharsis, so that looking back, students feel good not just about the course but also about the subject matter. The rubric is quite detailed. We are looking at the main category and subcategories, but in the rubric itself, you'll find specific suggestions on how to enhance these elements. So I definitely recommend taking a look at this rubric if this is the first time that you are hearing about it. However, this is not the only rubric that's available for improving courses. We also have the California Community Colleges Online Education Initiative, the OEI, the Open SUNY Course Quality Review Rubric, Quality Matters, then the Illinois Online Network Quality Online Course Initiative, and the California State University Quality Online Learning and Teaching. So a number of rubrics that are designed to standardize, in a way, instruction, but to provide a solid minimum that a good course would have. Again, I will focus on the Blackboard rubric because of my experience with it. I've been able to be on the reviewer end as well as a submitter of the content, and I love how the collaboration of faculty and the Blackboard community around this particular rubric really enhances teaching and learning. So this is our start, the rubric. Now, the other end that we'll try to connect and tie together is the hero's journey. So the hero's journey is in a form of a cycle. What that means is that a hero might venture multiple times through it, but also this particular journey does not indicate just one lifetime. The idea is that it can be repeated multiple times. The initial hero's journey, as presented by Joseph Campbell in 1949, was a little bit more complex. But what you see on the screen here is a little bit of a simplification that helps us to put our hands in a timely manner around it. So at this point, you probably see that we're going to travel in a clockwise fashion, that at the bottom there's going to be an abyss or some kind of a important event, and there are events leading up to it, and then events taking us away from it. And we'll come back to a lot more detail in just a moment. The hero's journey in 1949 had 17 elements. So this was the monomyth, again, based on study of myths in India, in Africa, as well as Native Americans. And then you can see the simplification of Christopher Vogler. Even though the date here says 2007, the initial release of the simplification came in 1985. Both of these are based on research of another professor, this one from the University of Chicago, Mireke Eliade, and Professor Eliade was working on what could be called shamanism, or trying to clarify what was called the medicine journey. So if you think about a generic problem that comes from nowhere, someone gets sick, and we are in the need of fixing. We are in the need of help. So someone goes out on a quest to find the medication, the elixir, and they undergo some trials. They come back with a solution. That's the very basic concept of a medicine journey. Then later was transferred into Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and today Christopher Vogler is leading this kind of a structured approach to writing, as well as screenwriting, within the 12 steps. Now, all of that, though, is based even deeper on publications by Carl Jung, and of course, without getting too close to psychology, which this is not my specialization. My specialization is in computer science and business administration. Carl Jung, of course, believed that people are not born in tabula rasa state, meaning we're not just empty slates where throughout life we learn things and the nurture makes us into who we are. At this point, I'm going to take it as a matter of opinion. Of course, the nature versus nurture is a big argument. But Carl Jung basically believed that we're born with certain predispositions already. He believed that there are these archetypes of a mentor, of a joker, archetypes that we seek out in life, but also archetypes that we present in ourselves. So one that is quite popular is the shadow. The shadow being sort of the idea we always look for nemesis, only to find out that all those elements of nemesis are already in us. So this gives you a good idea of where some of these principles are coming from. And next, I would like to walk fairly briefly through this hero's journey. And as an example, I'm going to use Star Wars, just to show you that movies that you might be very familiar with, and as you relate it to other ones, you'll find this kind of a concept of hero's journey and the main steps of the journey there. And as we go through this hero's journey the first time, I will just walk you with the background of the movie, just hinting at what might be happening in the classroom. And hopefully this will give you time to reflect a little bit, so that when we get to actually discuss how the hero's journey happens in the classroom with the aid of the ECP rubric, you'll have that context and that background ready. So the first step in the hero's journey is the ordinary world. Now in Star Wars, it's Luke who's farming on the desert planet, which is normal for him. We learned that Luke is still a child when he whines about power converters. We also see that he yearns for a life of adventure, but his life is uneventful with Uncle Owen. And that's the ordinary world. Notice that most movies are trying to introduce to us this ordinary world to make it relatable. Erin Brockovich is having a breakfast, and the kids are asking for a hamburger without the hamburger and without the cheese. So something that we can relate to from the ordinary world. Next, after ordinary world, we then see call to adventure. Now, this stage is fairly important and quite evident in most stories. In Star Wars, Luke's call to adventure comes when he finds a message stored in R2-D2. Of course, Leia famously says, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." And so, of course, we know that this it's a ripple of the Galactic War, and it found its way to Luke's ordinary world. But this call can come in many different ways. In Matrix, it's an actual phone call to adventure. Now, can you think about in the classroom, in the course, that we also ask students to make a step into an unknown. We call them to an adventure. The next step is the refusal of the call. Well, every one of our heroes is going to have some reservations. Now, initially in Star Wars, Luke refuses to call the call to join the rebellion and save Princess Leia. After finding Obi-Wan Kenobi, Luke still refuses to join as he has work, the harvest. And of course, Luke even doubts his ability to be of any help. He says, "It's all such a long way from here." At the end of this stage, Luke returns home and discovers his uncle and aunt murdered and their farm smoldering in ruin. We can see that with students. We can see that students often are dropping classes quite often at the beginning. We make a call to adventure, and the natural reaction is to say, no, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. So we have to convince them, right? Otherwise, and so if we just let things go as they are, just with a call, that may not be enough. So in stage 4, we have meeting of the mentor. Now Luke, for example, meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan explains about the Jedi Force and Luke's father, and of course, who is the mentor in the story that happens in the classroom. Well, hopefully it is the faculty member. However, it is quite possible that the faculty member takes on a different role, one of the other archetypes that Jung was talking about. The next step is crossing the threshold. So crossing the threshold means that we are now committing to the adventure. Now, Luke meets Obi-Wan Kenobi after the run with the Sand People. Obi-Wan explains what happens, but the actual crossing of the threshold happens in the cantina. Remember that catchy music with all the aliens. So the cantina or the bar is where Luke stares at all the activity. This is a threshold to the new world. So students are on this kind of a threshold as well, and we'll talk about how to help them deal with that particular element. So as a quick reference, we are in hour 3, so we are here at number 5, crossing the threshold. The next stage in Hero's Journey are test, allies, and enemies. Now this part of the classroom activities is quite natural. This is where we set challenges. This is where we are going to perform testing. This is where much of the activity happens. Now Luke will gather allies in the Star Wars story, like Han Solo and Chewbacca, and they tend to work together. They have various challenges, but with the help of the new allies, Luke succeeds in escaping the planet with the droids, and we see that Obi-Wan even uses his special forces. These are not the droids we're looking for, and these test allies and enemies, they all work together through multiple challenges for the single purpose of learning. In our stories, this is where our hero is learning new skills, and this is most appropriate concept that would happen in the classroom. After the majority of the tests are completed, there is a phase of an approach. Now, in Star Wars, Obi-Wan teaches Luke about the Force and how to use the lightsaber. Approach often means getting ready, preparing certain skills for a major battle. So they travel to Alderaan only to discover that the planet has been destroyed, replaced by Death Star. And so fear and doubt return to Luke, and so he seemingly looks at the insurmountable obstacle. And he says, I have a bad feeling about this. Anne of Green Gables at this point would say that I live in depths of despair. So the approach really means that there is something to look forward to, something to prepare for, and there is going to be attention given to that preparation that means increase in skills. After the approach, now at the bottom of our cycle is the crisis, the central ordeal. Now, with Luke, the ordeal is a test that he has to overcome. He has to rescue Princess Leia, and that was his ordeal. Luke and his companions draw on their skills to mount a successful rescue of Leia. However, the minor success is not without loss, as Luke witnesses Obi-Wan's death at Vader's hands. So, at this point, the hero is going to draw on the skills that he has learned during the approach and during the tests, and he needs to defeat some major obstacle. The central ordeal sometimes is called the belly of the fish, and positioned right at the bottom of the story, it basically means that the hero is challenged with something very, very difficult. And we also accept that he could fail. However, as the story progresses, we learn that the hero is able to defend his life, to defend basically at the last effort with the help even of the mentor. And so here the hero is going to get a reward. Now Luke, of course, emerges from the ordeal a stronger, more adult hero. Luke's reward is being able to join the fleet. He always wanted to be a fleet pilot, so now that's his reward. So let's say that after an ordeal, a student needs to be able to take some reward with him, going beyond just grades. And I'll make a point later that digital badges today are a great opportunity for a student to carry this kind of a sword, something that came out of an ordeal into the real world even later on. So now as we near the end of Hero's journey, the road back is a direction that the hero is heading in order to to deliver the elixir to the much needed problem. Luke's ordinary world is one without the Empire and without the threats of the Death Star. So Luke turns down Han Solo's offer to leave. He chooses the greater good to support the rebellion. So our hero needs to see that whatever they have learned is not just abstract, but they can take it in a very practical way back to help the people that they were sent away from. This takes us to the climax of the story. So while we do have a central ordeal at the 6-hour mark of the story, now we also need another climax. In this instance with Star Wars, the climatic final battle takes place, the attack on the Death Star. Luke succeeds in destroying the Death Star, of course. While Luke isn't physically reborn, we do see him undergo a change. Remembering Obi-Wan's words, Luke trusts the Force and comes into his powers. He takes his first steps towards becoming a Jedi. Now, this part actually in Joseph Campbell's interpretation would include this idea of apotheosis, meaning that not only the hero changed, but the hero gained skills to such a degree that the hero can be viewed larger than the hero ever was before, right up to a divine quality, some kind of a mastery level. And this resurrection applies not to actually a hero dying physically, but oftentimes for identity of the hero to die. I am no longer just a farmer boy who's waving a lightsaber. I now have become something more than that. And so in the classroom, is there a moment where the student feels they've become a musician? Maybe they have become a developer. That is an identity change, which in the story comes towards the end of our cycle. So the final stage in hero's journey is the return with the elixir. Of course, in Star Wars, the rebels will survive to fight another day. The elixir representing in the story the success of the journey. Often, of course, in the classroom, we want to make the story practical for the real world. So what do you bring out of the class into the real world? What is the elixir that will help the people, that will help you in the future? So this was a quick just review for anybody who has not been studying writing recently, a quick review of what the hero's journey is. And now it's time to apply it closer towards our instructional design, towards our focus of work. Now, I like this slide because it clearly shows that the hero's journey creates a connection between an ordinary world and a special world. Of course, in Star Wars, ordinary world would be living on a planet with a couple of suns. And a special world means living with the force. You can move stuff around with your eyes. In a classroom, perhaps, and I teach computer science in this class, Introduction to Computing, which I'm very proud of that class at Grand Valley State University. It's CS 150. In this class, we go from the ordinary world, I would call the analog world, to the digital world, the special world. Now, perhaps in your classroom, the special world is the world of chemistry. Maybe it's the world of music. But isn't it true that as instructors and as designers of course content, we try to bridge some kind of ordinary world with a special world where there are new things we're introducing and new things that we try to engage students in. And so you'll find this connection and the whole point of Hero's Journey in exploring that special world and doing it in such a way that it feels engaging and exciting to the hero. So let's start applying this to the ECP rubric, to the Exemplary Course Program Rubric. The ordinary world. There is a principle in storytelling and in writing that says that all stories start in the middle of something else. We interrupt the life of students who are just fine up to that point. We interrupt them. So the ordinary world, the stage in our classroom, really means that we have to show that we have understanding, empathy, that we are aware that about the world that they live in. They might view, so students coming into our classroom, they might say that their ordinary world is enough. However, in order to make a connection, to engage with students, we have to prove to them that we know where they're coming from. That's the reason why in many movies, that first phase is quite long. And of course, the time in movie making costs a lot of money. But the movie team, they try to prove to us that the characters we're dealing with are normal people. They could be us. So isn't interesting that the ECP rubric, of course, talks about an orientation to the course and also to the LMS, making that connection from the ordinary world to the tools that we'll immerse ourselves into. The interaction logistics has a number of suggestions on how to make good progress later on. But it really is this idea that perhaps what you're doing right now in terms of communication needs to be somehow adjusted, because your ordinary world is this, and this is maybe our class is summer class, 6 weeks. So we'll have to adjust to that. And of course, the institutional policies, the support that's posted places, this is very appropriate for this first phase. Now, this is here an important point that oftentimes the first thing that an instructor will do in the classroom is they will say, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and I studied here, then I went here, and then I won these awards, and here I am. Now, this presents to students this hero, not of their story, but another story, the hero in front of the class. And unfortunately, it suffers from what we could call survivor bias. Okay, so what's survivor bias? Imagine that you are on the Titanic, and you are one of the rich people, and you survived. Now you're in New York, bundled in some warm blankets, and someone is asking you, how did you survive? What did you do? And you respond, it's really simple. These are the principles. You follow the direction of the crew, all right? You do teamwork, right? Team. There's no I in team. You do teamwork, and you survive. It's very, very simple. So, the people on the Titanic told us, okay, get in the boat. There will be only 8 people on the boat, so work together to stay alive. And yeah, so we stayed alive. So the survivor bias simply means that those who do become successful often do that not for the reasons that they think, that there is a lot more failure that can happen, not for the fault of the other participants. And therefore, the recommendations of the survivors often do not tell the full story. So wouldn't it be better for an instructor in the first phase, during the first meeting, to really relate to the ordinary world and maybe talk about some failures that they have had in life and talk about how they also lived in the ordinary world where students reside right now. Again, sure, we're going to post in the course our bio, but what we say in the class and how we project ourselves on the first meeting, that might set this phase of ordinary world in the right position, and that is of empathy with the audience. So the next step, call to adventure. We are often asked to provide an introductory paragraph that says, why is this course important? And that's a great thing to do because it sets the purpose. And it is a call to adventure. The call to adventure also has to include some insight that students will have about the goals and objectives. However, we have to be very careful here about this concept of goals and objectives, and that's, of course, part of the ECP rubric. The learning goals, the organizational goals, the instructional goals are often more applicable to creating curriculum than actually to informing students. You see, when Luke was told, hey, we call you to adventure, he wasn't told, you need to demonstrate proficiency with the lightsaber, and you shall evaluate, the choices of your own father. That happened, yes, but he wasn't given these goals as a great way to call him to the adventure, to make him say, yes, I want to do that, to engage him. No, Luke was very simply told, you're our only hope, and so he was going to save the princess. Also, Luke wasn't given a choice of backing out, right? His uncle was efficiently removed from the scene. So at this stage of the call to adventure, it's necessary to tell the students why they will want to gain this knowledge. What are the benefits to them? And often it will include elements of mystery. So these goals and objectives, you take the Matrix where Morpheus says, you take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, I'm offering the truth, nothing more. Well, if Morpheus told Neo what the truth was, maybe he wouldn't go on the adventure at all. So we need to be very careful that we do not present the objectives just because we have them in our pocket and they're conveniently then located, and they fulfill the ECP rubric. We want to make sure that the goals and objectives set here will actually help students to make that step towards the adventure. The learner engagement suggestions are great at this point, communication strategies, and setting expectations for students. Now this leads us then naturally to the next step, refusal of the call. So notice that students naturally want to refuse. Again, without getting ourselves into a religious discussion, Carl Jung would say that it's deep in us. We're just born with this kind of process. I will just use the word naturally, right? If you're telling me to do something that I'm not comfortable with, is brand new, I am naturally going to have reservations. So students are going to refuse the call to the adventure, and it's necessary for us to create feedback loops. Now, I like to do that with a journal. Because it's a one-on-one, so students don't have to say in front of the class, I've always been scared of computers. Please don't make me do it. I'm here because it's required by my major. But they need to express that they really naturally want to refuse the call to adventure. And that's our phase 3. Now, phase 4, the students are meeting with a mentor. So notice that the meeting with a mentor is an excellent time for instructor to step in, not in the role of the almighty of the situation, but of the mentor. Here is the risk that we run. If we ask Carl Jung, he would sort of echo this. The instructor will have some role in the course. It is a danger here, a risk, that the instructor will actually become not a mentor, but the shadow. He could also become the sidekick, but the shadow means that there's a conflict created between the student and the instructor. So we don't want that. We want the instructor to be the mentor instead, where we set up the conflict between the student and maybe procrastination, between the student and their time management skills. Setting up the correct conflict here and the objectives we give to the students are part of it, is very important. I encourage everybody to check the Dysfunctional Illusions of Rigor by Dr. Nelson. Really talk about how many of professors, we fool ourselves about our role in the classroom, about role of grades, and about the need to weed out weak students who somehow are not going to be able to handle scientific rigor. So this is an important stage to set the role in the course correctly as a mentor. Now the students are reaching the threshold. In some classes, the threshold means that students are actually signing a commitment towards the class or a contract. It also sometimes has some dates involved. So there's a drop date where you don't get your tuition if you withdraw. So there's a threshold definitely in the classroom, and it means that the student is now committed towards the adventure, and some of the techniques in the learner engagement element of the ECP rubric are appropriate in this stage. After that, we are tackling the main part of the course. The stage in the story of test, allies, and enemies. Hopefully, we can create relationships between students so that they see each other as students. Again, setting up that conflict early on where procrastination is set as an enemy, where our refusal of doing homework or perhaps not progressing in practice so that our skills do not progress. All of those things would be an appropriate role of enemy. However, we would be the mentor, and then the allies could be the software that the student is using. It can be many things that we get to point out to students. And again, to follow Jung's idea, students are looking for that. They naturally want to feel like there are some allies, but they definitely want to know there's an enemy that's also being conquered. Tests, quite obvious. We have assessments, and the ECP rubric calls for assessments and the proper design of it. I would say that most of the stories that we see in movies or in books suggest formative assessment, where we give students multiple opportunities to learn and to be assessed, maybe self-assessment as well. this helps us to realize that that students are not going to learn everything in a short period of time or in a single way. The quizzes, of course, rubrics are all part of proper design of assessment that the ECP rubric definitely helps us with. So the goals in this section, the goals I mentioned early on in the ordinary world would be how to engage students even at that emotional level, not even the cognitive level, but the emotional level. In this area, goals simply mean short-term goals. So in my research on gamification, the theory that I'm developing is on using gamification in the classroom in a long game and a short game. Short game meaning lectures, peer instruction, creating some learning games, maybe Quizlet Live, Kahoot, those games during lectures, that's a short game. And then long game where you throughout the course create a game where from one activity to another students can carry experience points and see the progression throughout the process. So in this instance, the goals would be short-term challenges. And short-term challenges tend to promote the release of dopamine in our brain. So if you set a challenge and someone accomplishes that in games, that's a short loop, and it helps us to have a positive feeling towards the activity. Now, I do also want to mention that in step 6, test allies and enemies, there's actually hidden a Blackboard product. Of course, this product is called Ally. Now, I want to mention that product because one of the main concerns of the ECP rubric, ECP rubric is accessibility. And while it's certainly possible for us to be concerned with accessibility, we need help in assessing it. So the Ally product will give you almost game-like indicator of how accessible your PDFs, your Word documents are, and this is a tremendous help in showing that you as the instructor have made your best effort in making the course accessible. So make that software your ally and ask for it if your institution has not yet adopted it. Ally really helps you to not just evaluate accessibility the day one when the course is released, but every time you upload a document, you get feedback. And sometimes it's as easy as saying, oh, this picture, it's actually just decorative. There's no meaning to it. And that's going to improve the level of accessibility. But just as we get the idea of approach being like an incline where we provide the appropriate help to students to make progress, definitely this idea of accessibility is in the same vein that we are helping students to make progress towards a common goal, and some students, of course, will need more arrangements than others. And the central ordeal, I would suggest that in the course it will be the midterm exam. Now, this is the case for difficult midterm exams. Why? Because we are creating this ordeal that students are preparing for, and in our stories, the ordeal can never be completed without the faculty help. Okay, so perhaps, and going back to those illusions of dysfunctional rigor, perhaps when the midterm is very difficult, there is a way for an instructor through the curving process to provide this kind of a special world help in students, making a recovery. But making the exam difficult certainly provides for this kind of an accent in the storyline to show that this is a difficult part. And as you complete a difficult exam, students basically are going to feel like the test did not go well. They are at the depths of despair, and during the next meeting, you've curved the exam, and now you have helped students to recover. So a way to implement that ordeal, but then also to have the mentor help. So the next set of steps, the reward, the road back, the resurrection, the return of the elixir. Certainly goals and objectives are important here. This time our goals involve seeing the ordinary world. So how can we take the skills that we have collected, and how can we foresee in the future our use of them. First of all, we have to identify them. So as students are learning things, we want to make sure that their progress, we return grades as quickly as we can, but their progress is quite obvious. They can track it. And I would say that the reward that comes out of the ordeal could be a digital badge. So in Blackboard, of course, we have this feature called achievements, and you can set that everyone who finishes the midterm exam at 95% or more receives this badge. Now, if the midterm happens to be maybe skill-based, like an Excel or Microsoft Access database exam, but maybe the particular midterm is on storytelling, and you issue a storytelling badge. Students can then export that to the Mozilla backpack, put that on their LinkedIn, put it on Twitter or Google+. So what a beautiful way to give them something, this kind of a tangible reward that they can take back to the ordinary world and actually make use of. So at this point, this reward would encourage them. Now, sure, not everybody will get the badge, but the idea that they participate in a story where that reward was available and where, in the future they can retake, of course, the class if they want to, but that's how the story can be shaped. That is the point of design itself. So the resurrection, okay, the resurrection means the death of identity. Again, not heroes often do not die in reality of the story, although that does happen, but it's typically change of identity. So at this point, after this difficult exam, as we prepare towards the end of the course, students should start feeling like their identity is somewhat changing. Maybe they became programmers. Maybe we can call them writers. Whatever your area of study is, there's probably an appropriate title that could be shared with students, because that would mark their change of identity, their resurrection. And finally, we return with the elixir to the real world. The class ends. And what is the elixir? Well, the elixir isn't just the badge. It isn't the story itself, but it is the knowledge that the students take out of the class. And often it is not, let's say in Introduction to Computing, it is not just the knowledge of Excel, Access, Word, and the concepts of computing like cloud computing and IoT and big data. No, the main concept, the main elixir that students bring back out of my class is knowing that they are good at computers, or that they can be good if they give enough time towards the practice. So this stereotype threat that happens in STEM courses, I'm not good at computers. We can change that around after we tell this story where they bring the elixir back, and now they're ready to be professionals, so that will use technology, whether they're nurses that are using technology well, or business people calling meetings through technology. The main elixir they're bringing back then is knowing that they can be good at computers. So the identification at this point, what the elixir is the most important. They have learned many facts, and that's fine, but try to identify what the elixir is. So at this point, the goals and objectives, again, they may not be exactly the same as the curriculum goals, but making them applicable to the ordinary world will make those goals appropriate at this level. So at this point, I would like to present just another slide that will take you sort of sideways in this story, and that is, our students more and more are not just on hero's journey, but they take another type of a trip. More and more we hear about medications being used in order to enhance learning. And I'd like to encourage you to looking up on Netflix. There is a documentary called Take Your Pills. And what was really interesting to me in that was a study on neuropsychological effects of placebo to stimulate students in college. And the University of Pennsylvania here made the finding that students who took Adderall didn't actually perform better on tests of cognitive function. However, they actually they thought that they did. So the learning here was that it's not surprising that Adderall gave students the inflated sense of productivity, given that the drug, or a close cousin of amphetamine, unleashes the feel-good neurotransmitters dopamine that triggers the brain reward system and can produce a mind sense of euphoria. So on that question, how and how much did the pill influence your performance on today's tests? That was the only question where the placebo actually differed from the drug Adderall. And the students on Adderall felt that, yes, we did a lot better every time. So it seems that if the drugs are telling the students the hero's journey, they will subscribe to it, and they actually are able to study longer. But that is, I think, a little bit of a lesson that if we do not take students on the hero's journey and do not design it in, there are other large companies, other industries that certainly are willing to take their money to be on that journey. So to conclude with a quote, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Isn't it true that teaching is all about kindling that light? And I think telling the story of a hero's journey in the classroom makes very good sense. And for anybody that's going to look at you funny next time you mention the hero's journey or gamification in your work, here is inspiration of Carl Jung. So Friedrich Nietzsche said earlier, and those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. Well, with that, I'd like to open it to any questions that you may have, and we'll be happy to follow up on questions afterwards as well. Carrie, do we have any questions at this point?
I think we have answered most of the questions that have come in, so I think you've covered a good bit of it. Folks, do continue to ask questions if you have them. We will follow up after the session if there are any we've not been able to answer. I expect, Simon, this will be one that will get people thinking long after the session is over, and we may have some questions that come through in the ECP community later this afternoon. There is actually one question that has come in, Simon. If you could speak just a little bit more about Kahoot.
Say it again, please. About what?
Kahoot. I think maybe you had mentioned that at some point.
I guess I just can't hear you very well. Can you say that a little slower?
Yeah, so Kahoot, K-A-H-O-O-T, the program Kahoot.
Oh, Kahoot. Oh, yes. So in my class, I talk a lot about Vikings, and in Norway, the Norwegian Institute of Science, I believe, they came up with a peer instruction tool, which is free. And it is better than most of the tools that I have seen. And I have worked with Top Hat, with Poll Everywhere, and Echo 360, and others. And the reason why Kahoot is special is because the questions during lecture are presented only on the projector, not on the phones. So the question is on the projector, and the answers relate to characters, so that the students actually press the characters on their phones. And you can run it in individual mode or in team mode, where one phone can be used by 3 or 4 students at the same time. So Kahoot allows you to create questions and then gather feedback from students. And then students respond. Their score of response is based on whether or not they answered correctly and how quickly they responded. So even easy questions create a little bit of competition and create an energy in the classroom. So when I talked about that short game, that is definitely a key point. And if you read any research on peer instruction, you will see that the success is quite significant, that students feel more engaged, more likely to come to class, and also faculty feel engaged during this kind of a gaming class, because they have a moment to think about what they're going to say next. And they know which topic was answered correctly, which was answered incorrectly, therefore they can focus their lecture on the topics that are answered poorly. So Kahoot is a peer instruction product that is free, and it is very much something I would recommend for anyone who is teaching in the classroom, who is trying to maybe work on their short game.
Thank you so much, Simon. We do have some additional questions